I think there's a magician on the loose. There seems to be somebody rushing down the road with a magic wand, making all the banks disappear. Have you noticed? Banks seem to be closing and vanishing off the high streets. Somebody sent me a list, actually, of Lloyds Bank and Halifax. And this year, apparently they're closing quite a lot of branches all over the place. And I thought, that's a bit strange, isn't it? What is it? The banks are giving up on money, on people interacting with the staff and going about their business? It seems nonsense. And then I thought, well, OK, fair enough. If banks don't want to run the business like that, looking after people's money, maybe there's an opportunity for a different type of bank. Oh yes, of course, we've heard about this. This is the central bank and digital currency. If there are no banks, obviously you can't get your money out quite so easily. So presumably you've got to use some form of digital currency. And if the other banks are struggling and things are going a bit rough, there could be this more central bank. And by central, I mean central to the whole world. Which is a bit odd, really, because that means there's no competition, is there? The great thing about having a number of different types of bank is that you can go in and have a look at what the interest rate is. How much money, if I put my money into your bank, will I get back at the end of a certain length of time? Or how much does it cost if I go into the overdraft? Things like that. But if there's only one bank, a central bank, it can set its own standards, it can set its own rates, it can even introduce arbitrary things like carbon tax or a social score or something like that just sounds a little bit wacky. Who would want any of that? Certainly not me. No, if the banks are all closing from the high streets, from villages and small towns, and you're only left with the large branches, it struck me that of course that's an opportunity for ordinary people to set up their own bank. Now, if I was a very rich, enterprising sort of chap, I would think, do you know what, I don't know how difficult this is, but there would be definitely a need for a new type of bank, a bank that you could trust, money that you could see. It might be based on the value of everybody in that town, or what they do, or what they're worth, or all the property in that town. And maybe that bank could issue some new currency, its own currency, that everybody shared in. I know that at one point Swindon had its own currency, and Lewis in East Sussex had its own currency. It did work quite well for a bit. But if all the banks are disappearing, I'm sure that there could be some form of collective where people get together and they decide we'll run a bank. I think the lack of competition is the sort of thing that's going to put, say, a central bank out of the equation, because nobody wants some sort of sinister looking one bank, one rate, one way of doing things. I mean, why would you? I'm sure that people could get together, they could get their heads around this and work out actually what's beneficial to the people. People like people, don't they? I mean, living men and living women, they're not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're not just invisible people. They're not just legal entities on paper. They're living. They're sentient. They love to interact with people. They like to have a laugh and a joke. And if banks are slowly becoming invisible and there's nobody there to talk to anymore and be part of life and be beneficial, then I say goodbye to those, because we, the people, the men and women, the living people, can get together and sort it out ourselves, can't we? We're clever enough. I mean, if corporations, sort of faceless, mindless corporations who just want to make large profits all the time can do it, I'm sure that ordinary everyday people can get together and work out some form of constitution, some form of legal, whatever it might be, paperwork, in order to form some kind of bank and base that on something. I don't know how you do it, of course, but then I'm not terribly clever. But I do know there are people out there who are clever, and we can build on this. So if the banks want to disappear, that's fine, because the people will fill the void and we'll have something a hell of a lot better.